Hi everybody and welcome to today's ISE webinar. My name is Steve Ishwood, I'm Chief Exec of the ISE. We've got a great panel of speakers lined up who are going to be talking to you very shortly. But just before we get to those, just a little bit more about ISE webinars if this is the first time that you have tuned into one. We keep them very relaxed, very conversational. We really like to have your participation. We don't turn all your cameras on, but actually what you can do is if you use the control box that you've got on this platform, you can post questions through there. Please put questions in as we go along, and then I will field those questions to the panelists. Very shortly, I'm going to show a short video. Then I'm going to hand you over to Rebecca Fielding, who is MD and founder of Gradconsult, who's worked with us very closely on this webinar. Gradconsult are one of our supplier partners. We've got a great relationship with Gradconsult and really pleased that we're working together on this. It's without the support of people like Rebecca and her business, we couldn't do all the work that we do or bring the content to you. A final point is we're recording this. Lots of people do pick up with our webinars after the event. We know how busy everybody's diaries are at the moment, even though schools have gone back. So you can look at this afterwards, and also please share it amongst your colleagues in your peers. We'd spread the debate around about what's happening, particularly a subject like today is in terms of the future of assessment centres. So that's enough from me. I'm going to run a video now, which you will shortly see, and then you'll hear from Rebecca, and Rebecca will introduce everybody else on the panel. So let's hope the technology works. The video should run.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Stephen. Hopefully that's given you all either flashbacks or the shivers in recognition. I think many of us can empathise and recognise with those challenges of running assessment centres. However many times we ask, there's always adjustments that turn up on the day. We get ghosted by candidates, assessors get pulled away and things happen. We never quite have the catering right, do we, in whatever room? And if you've been doing it as long as I have, then you also have the flashback memories of flip charts, pens that don't work, clipboards, oh, nightmare. So I think that really, for me, kind of reflects part of the stimulus for this conversation, really. It was based on a WhatsApp conversation in the ISE Recruitment and Selection WhatsApp group. If you're not in it, please join. It's a great source of insight. And people were just asking me, what are people doing around assessment centres? Are you doing things differently? Are you doing them digitally next year? Should we be thinking about doing them in a very different way? And a couple of people started to get involved. So actually, I've been questioning that too. Is it still the best way and the right way for us to be assessing people? So given we've thrown everything else up in the air this year, it felt like the right time to have this debate. So I've assembled a crew of incredibly knowledgeable and brilliant people to join me here today and really pull apart and put back together this issue. And I think it's fair to say that nobody here, whilst we're going to play the roles of devil's advocate and argue one way or the other, none of us are saying we've definitely got a specific view on this. And indeed, Rowena, who's kindly arguing against assessment centres for us, her business actually provides assessment centres, and very good ones too, and has many wonderful occupational psychologists who can provide that service for our clients. So we certainly won't want you to think that Rowena is anti-assessment centres. She's here to be a provocateur, to get us all thinking and questioning, and we're all doing that, I think, in isolation. So instead of that, let's do it together. I'm going to ask everybody to introduce themselves now. I think most of you will know me. Stephen's very kindly already introduced me. I'm the founder of Gradconsult. I'm your facilitator for today. Who else have I got joining with me? I'm going to come to the wonderful Kerry Blondell next. Kerry, could you give us a brief introduction to yourself?
Wonderful. I'm glad we're recording this so I can show this back to my team. You think I'm wonderful. Thank you. So my name's Kerry. I work for a business called Capgemini. So we specifically provide end-to-end solutions to business challenges, whether that is business, people orientated, or technology associated. So we provide outsourcing services, consulting, digital transformation, you name it, we do it. So we provide services to HMRC, Heathrow, Unilever, McDonald's, just to name a few. So I've been in recruitment for approximately 7 years now. So started off with experienced hires, moved on to exec recruitment, and now I've been converted to the dark side. So I focus on apprentices and grads. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful, Kerry. I can't wait to hear your thoughts later. I'm going to come on to Ben next. Ben, over to you. I like to refer to Ben, if anybody doesn't know him yet, as the A-team of the occupational psychology world. He's the occupational psychologist.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'm not sure which character from the A-team, Howling Mad Murdoch or something, but so yeah, really nice to be here. I'm a chartered occupational psychologist. I design bespoke tests, assessment centres, both face-to-face and online over the past year, especially so. In my previous life, last year, I was chair of the Association for Business Psychology as well. So I like to think I've got a broad, objective view of the market for assessment, and I'm arguing the case for assessment centres this afternoon.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ben. Hannah, over to you.
Hi everyone. My name's Hannah Whelan and I work at Fujitsu. I joined Fujitsu as an apprentice myself back in 2012, started in various different HR roles within the organisation, and then moved into the early careers space in 2015. So I've been working in early careers over the last 6 years, starting off looking after mainly apprenticeship recruitment and now recruiting our graduates and apprentices across the UK and Northern Ireland. So very fond of assessment centres. I've used them ever since I've joined the team. Massive shift up this year. So yeah, looking forward to this conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hannah. And who better than somebody who came through that route themselves to now be managing the process? We have another contributor today, Rowena Bach. Stephen, would you mind playing Rowena's introduction video for us? Because she couldn't join us today in person. She's very kindly videoed her contribution. So here's a quick introduction from Rowena.
Hi, I'm Rowena Bach. I'm Early Careers Recruitment Strategy Director for People Scout. People Scout is an RPO organisation that also encompasses TMP, who are talent advisory experts, so brand and assessment. My role is to help clients think differently about their recruitment processes in order to change and address the problems that they face. So be that diversity, efficiency, scale, niche. And I was delighted to take part in this conversation because I'm a real restless person for change and improvement. And I feel that assessment centres are a space that we can do that, especially with technology around at the moment.
Fantastic. A restless agent for change and provocateur. I love it. What a great description. Okay, so we're going to start debating and pulling the different perspectives apart. We're going to start with Rowena and Ben giving the arguments for and against before coming to you for some opinion and our other panelists. But before we do that, I'd also, or at the same time as doing that, I should say, I'd like to invite you to participate in a poll. So Stephen's going to very quickly or shortly share a poll with you, which is, where do you stand on assessment centres? Do you love them? Do you like them? Do you live with them? Do you dislike them, or do you loathe them? So the panelists and organisers won't be voting. This is just for our audience. If you can give us your responses, that would be fantastic. And we'd encourage you to respond to that poll as we start to debate the issue. So Stephen, are we able to move into the debate at the same time as the poll?
Yes, we can all hear you. So the poll's running at the moment, which you should be able to see. If you can't, I can give you the results.
No, that's fantastic. I'm going to come first of all then to Ben. If you could run the poll for maybe 1 more minute. Ben, maybe I could ask you for all of the arguments for assessment centres. And once we've given that poll 1 more minute, we'll switch the camera back to your lovely self.
Okay, thank you. So there are 4 main reasons I'd like to cover in 4 minutes as to why assessment centres should stay. The first and probably the most important one is that assessment centres predict performance. So there's been countless research studies over decades that show that they predict job performance, whether that's managers' ratings, whether it's how quickly graduates are promoted, whether it's concrete points like sales performance, or the ability to be trained in the job. So time and again, they're shown to predict a wide range of relevant criteria. What you also find is that if you design them specific for your organization, that predictive power increases even further. I won't get too geeky on you, but essentially we plot it on a scale from 0 to 1, the predictive power, 0 being you might as well pull the name out of a hat, 1 being perfect prediction. Assessment centres are around about 0.4, with about 0.3 being seen as acceptable. But if you go bespoke, you're getting about 0.55, so you're getting much better. So that's reason 1. Reason 2 is that they have been shown to add value over simple single exercises. So if you just gave someone an interview or just gave someone a group exercise on its own, an assessment centre adds to that. You're not simply measuring the same thing 2 or 3 or 4 times. They're also way better than other very common selection tools like unstructured interviews, CV exploration interviews, references, biographical data, etc. Number 3.
Well, just out of interest then, Ben, an unstructured interview favoured by many a senior manager over the years. What kind of predictive validity we're talking about there?
So that's around about 0.1. So
nice.
it hovers around the same area as references, actually there's some things that things like number of years experience actually negatively correlate with performance, but only slightly. So it's so open to bias and so open to different interpretations that an unstructured interview is not usually advised unless you've got a really good kind of caliber of people coming through to that stage. So the third point I'd make is that they're fairer than other methods. So it's well known that ability tests can persistently show adverse impact, and you need quite a sophisticated approach when setting cutoffs to reduce this. Same thing as personality questionnaires, interviews, video interviews, huge risk of assessor bias. So assessment centres have multiple exercises, multiple competencies, multiple chances to perform well, and you have the opportunity to challenge one another for your biases at the integration session at the end.
Fantastic.
And then the final, and the final point is a realistic job preview. So situational judgment tests can do that to an extent online, but actually getting people to perform the tasks they'll need to do in the job allows a real two-way assessment of fit rather than just being something that's done to people. And there's a whole host of other reasons, but I'll pause there in the interest of time.
Wonderful. Well, we have got a very solid case at the top of the session to keep them. That would substantially rebutting our assessment centres dead there to start us off, Ben. Thank you. I was really interested, Stephen, you quickly showed us the poll. Would you mind popping that back up for us? Because you know, from a psychologist perspective, it's always nice to see a distribution curve, isn't it? This one's a slightly skewed distribution curve, but nonetheless, we have got a mixture of opinion in our audience, which is really interesting to see. The majority liking or loving them. There is a significant portion, however, here joining us to question them, to say, hey, I live with them, there might be something better. And a number of people saying, I really would rather see that assessment centres are done and dusted and over. So maybe you've won a few of those people over, Ben. Who knows?
Maybe.
Maybe. We'll see. I think today's all about challenging our own preconceptions around this. Let's look at completely the other end of the argument now, if you wouldn't mind, Stephen. And we're going to move over to Rowena to hear all of her argument about why she thinks assessment centres are dead.
Hi, so worst things about assessment centres, in my opinion, they are designed for volume first and assessment second. So really to make sure that we can manage these large scale programmes, which when it's really about assessment, needs to be assessment first. I mean, I totally get it, but that's one of the worst things. From a content perspective, and I have utmost respect for the Oxykes at our business in People Scout, it is really difficult, if not impossible, to get a true work reflection there, and that, as everyone will agree, is the best way to assess somebody. From an experience perspective, it's a process that's being done to you, which is never going to bring out the best in somebody. In fact, it'll draw down on social norms that are more likely to benefit individuals who've had social support to set them up for these sorts of environments. So it's very disabling for or disempowering for those who haven't had those advantages. And then I've just seen some catastrophic assessment centres, people crying under the pressure. Oh my goodness, the tension in the air, the awkwardness at lunch. There's a lot about assessment centres that doesn't work.
That's it. I think we've all been there. I think I've been there with candidates in the loo, having some kind of moment in the middle of the day. I'm sure many of you have too. So I think Rowena making, again, some compelling arguments around social mobility, social capital, and the advantages that can give to people who are more comfortable in a professional environment, about the candidate at the heart, and the predictive validity, which you talked about, Ben, of real work experience as opposed to simulated work experience, and how difficult it is to get, as you talked about, those bespoke, tailored psychometrics and tests and assessment centres really, really right. So I think lots of great arguments. We also saw and felt all of the pain, didn't we, in the video, of the reality of what it's like for our own teams as well. People just not turning up, ghosting us, or all the other things that happen in there. So we've had some really good kind of provocateurs, some good thinking and critique from either end of the spectrum. At this point, I'm coming away from our experts and over to our practitioners. I'm going to come to Hannah, you this time first, if I may. What are your thoughts on what you've just heard?
I think with me, if I was answering that poll at the beginning of the session that we were running today, I would be one of those people that, I don't love assessment centres. I like assessment centres. I feel they do the job that we need them to do. But I feel like we have the opportunity to kind of tailor them, and I think they need to be fit for purpose of what we're looking for. I think we need to be careful in terms of what we were saying, in terms of people. We've all been there with a candidate having a bit of a wobble before the day, they're having a bit upset in the bathroom, and I think it's important to try and create, whilst candidates are at an assessment centre, it does need to be that formal process. Something we really focus on is trying to make it quite an inclusive and calm environment. So I can also see Rowena's argument in terms of, are our candidates actually reacting in a real way that they would in a day-to-day job role? We don't know. Obviously, when people come to an assessment centre, they're putting on their game face, they're putting on their kind of best self. So how accurate are these assessments that we're doing, and actually getting a true representation of the people that we're seeing for our job roles and at our assessment centres? But on the flip side of that, I think that we do put a lot of work and effort into our assessments as part of our assessment centre, and we try to make it as real life as possible. And I think what you've got to take out of that is you're looking for key strengths in different areas. So, and the purpose obviously having the different elements throughout the day, so you can assess those in the different environments. We mix up the groups, we mix up the assessors, so it's not one consistent view throughout the day. So I think from our perspective, we put in that balance to make sure that we get that bit of real life reaction in terms of how they react in that situation, as well as trying to account for the things that they may predict or they may be expecting as part of an assessment centre. So I do see both sides. I think I'm very much a bit of a in the middle ground, but I think as long as it's created purposefully and carefully what you're trying to assess, they can be successful.
Fantastic, thank you, Hannah. And there are a couple of points there that really resonated to me. The one being about, that the fact that behaviour changes when people are observed. I think that's a psychological phenomenon that's quite well known, isn't it, Ben? That people behave differently once they know they're being watched.
It's the Hawthorne effect, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Great. Big Brother effect, I call it. Lay person here. So that was the whole idea behind Big Brother, wasn't it? That they would forget they're being watched, and we start to see people actually behaving as they would do normally. That really resonated with me, Hannah. And then the other thing that really resonated with me and kind of I provoked my thoughts was, how rigorous this process is, particularly for apprentices at the very beginning of their career. Rowena talked about that lack of social capital and experience, and how crazy it is that we put our apprentices through these incredibly rigorous processes, and senior leaders are often never put through anything like a process that's rigorous. And you know, the question should be, should we be doing it for more senior leaders, I suppose, rather than the other way around. But that really struck a chord with me. Thank you, Hannah. Kerry, what resonated with you in the comments from Ben and from Rowena?
Oh, look, it's a difficult one, isn't it? And I am really, really torn. Very compelling arguments. But I think my overarching thought is that the assessment centre is just one part of the process. You know, it's the pre-work that goes into that, from attraction, engagement, right through to the assessment centre stage. So you'd like to think that we're putting feelers out, you know, testing the water with candidates, giving them snippets of what our environment is like to work in, whether that's upfront blogs or mentorship from people who are on the ground doing the job. So a realistic job preview versus a formal assessed environment. You know, we're going to put what we want on the website, aren't we, all the lovely fluffy stuff, but actually putting our candidates in front of the people who are going through the program or the graduate role or the apprenticeship is so valuable. So I think it's just one small part of a process. There was a comment made around perhaps disempowering candidates, or you know, the awareness of what to expect from the day. Fortunately, I've never had any criers attend my assessment days.
You're still 7
a
years
couple
young.
of assessors,
Don't
but
you
never
worry,
candidates.
Kerry. You're 20 years in, so you have a few criers.
I've cried a few times. But no, in all seriousness, I think one thing that we do, and this isn't a plug, but I think one thing that we do particularly well at Capgemini from a face-to-face but also virtual perspective is we have got those support mechanisms in place so that our candidates are not going into our days feeling intimidated or with any, I say, unnecessary nerves. So for example, we provide some mentorship. So before they attend the day, they can speak to a current grad or a current apprentice to say, look, what is it really like from a program perspective, but also an AC delivery. We also do briefing calls with the recruitment managers before the day. So we will get all 8 candidates onto the assessment centre and we will just have quite an informal chat. You know, it's one thing sending yet another email saying this is what to expect, but it's a different story actually speaking to someone and setting that scene. The feedback too also speaks for itself. So the feedback that we receive from candidates around the virtual environment is really, really positive. It's always a surprised reaction. Oh, the virtual environment isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. I take that as a compliment. But again, it just comes down to scene setting.
I couldn't agree more, and I'm fascinated because I think we all think there's going to be a long tail, don't we, with digital assessment centres here. Many of us have moved, and as we start to return to economic recovery and the market starts to become more competitive again, will that candidate experience feedback hold up, or are we being slightly flattered by the market conditions at the moment? So candidates are you know, more worried about getting a job, getting less offers, and so therefore being more polite to us. You know, one of the things I've certainly seen over my 3 recessions is that candidate behaviour significantly improves when the market conditions decrease. I think that's fair to say. So I'm really fascinated. I, like you, was surprised that the candidate experience is holding up really well with the digital format with assessment centres. I was expecting it not to be as positive. But I'm also, the cynic in me is slightly holding back to say, wait a year, wait 2 years. So let's just wait and see.
I mean,
So thank you.
Our attendance rates have gone from 92% to 98% since we've gone into this virtual environment. But could that be attributed to perhaps the lack of available roles? So, you know, that there's less options. Who knows?
Exactly. Who knows? As I say, you always get better attendance and more polite emails during a recession, as well as more applications. So great first question. Great way for us to kick off. Let's move on now. I suppose I want to talk about why now. Obviously, there's been, you know, a seismic change in society. But I want to ask perhaps Rowena this time, first of all, why she thinks now is the time for us to be questioning assessment centres.
So why is it now the time to lose assessment centres? Well, my role in this debate is to be a bit of a catalyst, an advocate for thinking differently, trying to create some reasonable doubt in your mind as to whether you should continue with assessment centres and use this as an opportunity to approach assessment differently. The significant reason is that there's a major issue in our employee populations around diversity and representation across all factors of our society, and assessment centres are one part of the puzzle in trying to change that. When some of the most shocking adverse impact occurs when you have individuals who haven't been surrounded or coached and counselled by the ways that make you successful in the false format of an assessment centre experience. So we need to stop using this format and start looking at other ways to get to know these young people and work out if they're right for the role and right for us, and let them experience the role in the company to work out if our companies are the right for them. So it really is time to stop using a tool that doesn't replicate the work and start using tools that do. We do run a lot of assessment centres for our clients. It is the comfort zone of a set of processes. It works effectively for volume, and it isn't broken, but it could be better. And I think restlessly striving to change the way we do recruitment to better serve our communities is really very important.
Fantastic. So Rowena there arguing for us that the time for change is now, not only because we've been through this radical period of disruption, so everything's up in the air, why not now? If we're not going to question it, why not now? But also, I think, making quite a compelling argument around D&I. So we all want to see a significant difference in our D&I agenda and outcomes, and arguing that if that's what we want to see as the outcome, then we need to start radically changing how we're doing things in order to achieve that. And that's why she's arguing why now. But Ben, do you really believe that this COVID accelerator effect, the flip to the digital format, this plethora of alternative ways to assess, means that it is now the time for us to do that? Or even, is it the time for us to be thinking about, do we go back to face-to-face or does it stay digital? What do you think? Has it really killed off the assessment centre the last 18 months?
Yeah, I guess from my own experience, I don't think I mentioned it at the start actually, but I run a company called STEN 10, and we provide these assessment centres, and the work fell off a cliff. It was the work completely evaporated for recruitment and selection. It was about at 30% of usual levels, which actually that was quite good considering what was happening. What I have seen is the rapid adoption of virtual assessment centres, and I've attended the ISE conference for a number of years now, and there are various vendors that are offering virtual assessment centres, and it's seen as a bit kind of fringe, a bit kind of like right on the cutting edge, and who's going to take the risk and do it. And now so many people are doing it, whether it's a dedicated platform or whether it's a combination of Zoom and file sharing services. People have almost been forced to take the leap, and I think, much as Kerry, you were saying about the candidate experience, I think the coordinator experience is, that wasn't as bad as I thought, and it's got a number of benefits to it. I think looking at virtual assessment centres, we've delivered them in a whole variety of forms for recruitment and development now, and I think that they've got some key benefits. You've got no venue costs and logistics to manage. There's no travel time or expense for assessors and candidates. So from a social mobility perspective, saying, come to Canary Wharf and be assessed here, that's removed from the picture. It's safer from a health perspective to be doing it online, and I even when the restrictions are lifted, you may well get applicants who have concerns about that. There's environmental benefits. There's no paperwork. The carbon footprint's reduced in terms of travel. And there's also some things that I was actually speaking to another psychologist the other day who's about to start a PhD on the unique characteristics of virtual assessment centres, things like social mobility. So what kind of cognitive biases are prompted in a candidate who's asked to go to a big swanky office in Canary Wharf, maybe not seeing anyone else that looks like them or is from the same background as them, versus completing it in the comfort of their own bedroom, living room, and in their own environments. So we could see that it's got some unintended or unexpected benefits coming from it as well. I guess on the flip side, so should we move whole scale to virtual? I guess I've got a couple of caveats that I'd place on that. So one is that we don't know what the predictive validity is yet for virtual assessment centres. We don't know whether there's a greater amount of role playing online, or whether assessors are able to assess as accurately when doing it via a patchy Zoom call, etc. I guess it's also a missed opportunity to show them their place of work, to meet potential new colleagues face to face. And I think much like Rowena was saying, it is a challenge to create a scenario that mirrors the role they're going to be joining. But assuming there will be some face-to-face element of their actual job, and we won't all be working from our bedrooms forever, then actually getting them to meet individuals, to deal with a difficult customer, to work with their peers to resolve a problem, that's going to be far more realistic, and therefore it will be more predictive. So yeah, I think it's the COVID effect has caused a seismic ripple to go through the way in which we deliver assessment centres. I think there are some clear benefits to running them virtually, but I do worry that real life interpersonal interaction might have effects in terms of validity and selling the brand and the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, there are those sectors where, you know, we all sit here from the comfort of our bedrooms in professional roles, don't we? There are entire sectors of people who've been working throughout this pandemic in the healthcare sector, transport, logistics, retail, manufacturing, for whom life has carried on much as it did before, but with, you know, a greater distance and more masks, really, and a lot more hand gel. So I'm also thinking about it more like an elastic band being stretched to its extreme, and it's probably going to ping back, but just be a little bit more flabby than it was before. That's
a wonderful mental image, Rebecca.
Isn't it? Isn't it? Yes. It never quite goes back to how robust it was before when you've stretched it as far as we've all stretched this year. Thank you, Ben. Wonderful. Hopefully we're getting people really thinking from a pragmatic perspective, because I'm always the person, I love to hear about the research. That PhD sounds amazing. Can't wait. But from a practitioner perspective, we can't wait 4 or 5 years for a PhD. We need to make decisions for next year now, don't we? So I'm sure loads of other people want to know as well. Kerry, Hannah, what are you planning to do for next year? Is it assessment centres? Is it digital? Is it face-to-face? Is it a blend? What are you thinking? And can I come to you first this time, Kerry, if I may?
Yeah, sure. Look, it is really hard to predict, isn't it? But I think just based on feedback that we're getting from assessors, candidates, which eerily is the same percentage. So we went out to our assessors and candidates and said, you know, what do you want to do going forward? Would it be face-to-face, virtual or blended? 75% of both parties said that they would like to either take a blended approach or to go completely virtual. And for benefits that Ben has already listed, you know, same feedback coming through just from different parties. So time efficiencies, cost savings, flexibility, you know, no more fighting for meeting rooms in the office, for example. If suddenly we get a spike, which at the moment our recruitment demand has doubled from when we last had our largest spike, which was 2019, we have to react very quickly as an organisation. But equally, the competitive nature of the graduate environment, apprenticeship recruitment, etc., they are chomping at the bits to come in and see us. So efficiency, saving energy, travel time, it's a lot more relaxing, I say that loosely, for the candidates because they are in their own environments. I think we'll take a blended approach. And I think it works, but I think there needs to be a clear justification from businesses as to why they are taking a blended approach, just to tackle any questions that will come through from either parents or candidates themselves. You know, what is the justification for doing that?
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kerry. A pragmatic middle position between our two arguments today in response to listening to candidates and clients. And in the absence of having, as Ben said, that predictive validity, we don't know yet. We don't know for certain whether or not digital is as valid as face-to-face, and we probably won't know for about 1 year to 2 years.
We have got our conversion rates, so our offer rates from the virtual environments. At the moment, it's increased from 71% to 76% in terms of who we're making offers to. So yes, our sample size is not as big as what you would expect from a PhD, but with the data that we've got to work from, the signs are positive so far. So
Brilliant.
we need to do a second run of our surveys to assessors and candidates, but so far so good.
Fantastic. And for me, that predictive validity is then that next step, which is, okay, so we've hired more of them, they've passed, more of them have passed the benchmark, but do they go on to actually do well in their job? Has that assessment been, yeah, absolutely. Has that assessment been a valid test of whether or not they're good at doing the job? And that for me is that validity factor that we're just not going to know until people have been in the job for a little while. So we just don't know how our assessors are approaching it or not. I'm going to come to Hannah now. I could keep going for ages here, but I really want to hear from Hannah. What are you doing at Fujitsu this year?
So if I cast my mind back to when we were just about to kind of start, there was the rumblings of coronavirus. We weren't really sure what was happening, and we were saying, well, what are we going to do? Are we going to stop recruitment? Are we going to carry on? Do we think of a virtual alternative? I think as a team, we were all a bit scared at that point, thinking, oh my God, we've only ever known face to face. How's this going to work? Are people going to be able to get in? And the panic that set in was tough. It was a challenge for us all, but we got through it. And I think, like Kerry said, we ran surveys, we've been running virtuals since we went into lockdown. It's our main, obviously, way of the process for this year, and it's 100% virtual. And that feedback is really, really good. Our success rates at assessment centres, we've filled pretty much all of our role. Well, yeah, 100% success rate at every assessment centre we've run. Hiring managers really like the flexibility and availability that they can get from their whole team as an input on the assessment centre as well. So with a face-to-face assessment centre, you're relying on people being able to travel on that day, get down the day before, not having any big major projects on. So because we're such widespread geographically as a business, we're able to have team members from all over the country, even in kind of all over the world, attend these assessment centres should we need to. We had a hiring manager dialing from Australia on one of our assessment centres. So it was a real way for them to still have that input and be part of that hiring decision. I think for us as well, we've considered what's it going to look like going forward. Are we going to do a bit of a blended approach? Are we going to stick with 100% virtual? And I think very much like Kerry, I think the hybrid approach would probably be the best option for us. But I think there's a lot of thinking that needs to go into behind that. So typically an assessment centre is finished and over and done with in a day. We were thinking of potentially doing group tasks online as a virtual activity and then doing a follow-up interview for those that have met our benchmark. But what's the impact and obviously the scheduling side of that? So that means we need our hiring managers for an extra half a day. We would need to make sure we had a slick process and candidates would be prepared for that 2-day process and be upfront about it from the offset. Because I think that's another day for them out of work or out of college if you've got an apprentice. So it's making sure that it still fits the purpose of what we need it to do, and making sure our activities are still reflective of what we want to see within the organisation.
And there's also potentially, I think a lot of people are thinking about that. Can we do a final interview that's face to face? And I think the big risk there is, as Ben said right up at the top, interviews are one of the least predictive things that we can do, and now we're going to put that final decision into the hands of maybe 1 or 2 hiring managers as opposed to the 10 or 12 on all the benefits we have of that multiple assessment with multiple people. So I feel your pain and your struggle with that one. I really do, because it's so difficult to get that balance and blend right, isn't it? Stephen, would you mind very much opening the poll for us, because I think everybody would be interested in what people on the call are thinking about doing and planning for next year. So if you could please let us know what you're planning to do for next year. Are you not going to do assessment centres at all? Actually, we're going to get rid, or we're going to do something very different. Are you going to do digital assessment centres next year? Are you going to do face-to-face assessment centres next year? And bear in mind, as I said, a number of sectors have continued to do face-to-face assessment centres throughout, to do hybrid assessment centres, as Hannah and Kerry are doing, or we just don't know yet. Actually, we haven't made a decision, and coming here today is part of our thinking process. If I could encourage you to be responding to that poll, that would be wonderful, because we are now slowly coming towards the kind of last 15 minutes of our session. So I'm keen to come to each of our panelists and ask you the question in summary from what you've heard today. Are assessment centres dead? Or is there perhaps life in the old dog yet? So if you wouldn't mind, Ben, I'll come to you first, and then I will share Rowena's responses on video before coming to Kerry and Hannah to wrap us up. So over to you, Ben. Life in the old dog yet?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say that despite me with my scientist hat on saying we haven't yet gathered the data, I am fairly confident that they will predict performance. So that's more of a belts and braces approach. I think it's dovetailed really nicely with the request that we were seeing from clients pre-COVID who were saying, look, as well as the assessment activities, can we have a meet the graduate section? Can we have a introduction from our chair? Can we have an informal fun activity blended in with the assessments? Now, there's perhaps less need to try and achieve that tension, which can feel a little bit disjointed if we do move some of the assessment online via a hybrid method like Kerry and Hannah were saying, face that and meet the team, etc. And maybe that's where the focus is more, as well as maybe kind of a little mop up required. So I think they're here, but I think they're going to change in nature.
I love that. So they're here to stay, but they're evolving. They're evolving. Fantastic. Thank you, Ben. I look forward to seeing the evolution.
Evolving.
Yeah, wonderful. Stephen, could we hear Rowena's thoughts to wrap us up?
We can do. And also give me a shout when you want me to show the poll results as well, because I can put those on the screen when you want those. So,
we'll come to those after Rowena's video. That would be perfect. Thank you. That might help inform Kerry and Hannah's thoughts.
It's no good me advocating to get rid of assessment centres without giving you a viable alternative. And to my mind, there are two channels that can be explored, and both would remove the pressure and resource cost of assessment centres and introduce mechanisms for really getting to know those people. So the first one is the more widespread adoption of interns into graduate programmes. Now, I've done some paper-based analysis on the cost of this, and it looks like it adds up where you recruit your grads from your intern base, from your base of interns. It adds up because you take out the cost of doing the graduate recruitment and that very expensive process, and you invest it in understanding your interns and building relationships earlier in the pipeline at university. I mean, that is a win all round. The second way I think that we could change is to start thinking about it as more of an assessment experience for the candidate. And this is also an impressive way to differentiate yourself when candidates are applying to so many different roles and trying to decide who's right for them. Imagine instead of an assessment centre that you think about your entire process and think about, for the roles that you're recruiting, how do you release experiences and challenges and work insight assessments that these candidates get involved in over a short period of time, which tells you about them and how they work and how they will tackle the likely things that they will face in the office and in their day-to-days. All the while they are getting used to the roles, getting used to you as an organisation. The technology is there. I mean, the brilliant thing about being a People Scout that I've had going from in-house to this role over a number of years is being tech agnostic. So I get to see exactly what's on the market and what works and what doesn't. And everything is there to do this. It's just going to take a few innovative leaders to step forward and do it differently.
Rowena there again, being an agent provocateur, encouraging us to think about experiential assessment and different routes. I'm fascinated to see the poll. I'm sure Kerry and Hannah would like to see it as well before I come to them for their final thoughts. So very few people not going to do them. I'm sure Ben will be delighted to hear that we've got a big proportion doing it digitally, some continuing with face-to-face, and then this big chunk like yourselves, Hannah and Kerry, doing the hybrid assessment centre. Nearly a quarter, though, don't know yet, and I completely empathise with that position. Who knows what's going to happen in terms of safety, travel, any further spikes or new variants that we might see popping up. But hopefully the vaccination programme brings us to a happier, more secure place come this autumn. That leads me nicely into coming to Hannah and Kerry for your final thoughts on our debate, on what we've heard. Over to you. Could I come to you, Hannah, first?
Of course. I think, yeah, definitely it's been a great debate to be a part of. So thank you very much for inviting me. And I think one thing that's really stuck with me is what a manager mentioned to us previously, is that it is exactly right. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. We don't know how long after social distancing, working from home, what that balance is going to look like going forward. So I think on our roles, we have to be prepared for kind of all eventualities, really. And that virtual presence is becoming really important at the moment. So how can our candidates present themselves online effectively if that's going to be something that's with us going forward? And a virtual assessment centre exactly draws that out. We'll still need that face-to-face element, I think, at some point, but what that looks like, I think, is something we're probably all busy looking at in our teams right now. But yeah, from my perspective, I think they're very much still here to stay, but they're pushing us to kind of challenge our ways of thinking and challenge the status quo at the moment.
Fantastic. So you think it's important for you to keep that agility in your response and keep reviewing that over the forthcoming year. Fantastic. Thank you. Kerry, your final thoughts to wrap us up?
Oh God, I could go on for hours on this. Look, I'm still torn. I think they definitely are here to stay. It's the fear of the unknown, isn't it? If we remove assessment centres, well, what do we do? And as Ben rightly said, there's no data for us to be able to make a sensible sort of judgment on that. I think we have to go off the feedback that we're receiving from both assessors and candidates from a commercial perspective, but also a personal one as well, in terms of feelings and emotions, etc., and experiences. For, you know, our pool of candidates, their experiences are limited. You know, they know kind of loosely what to expect from an assessment centre. So I think with our support, and this comes back to my original point of it being an entire process, it's going to be the pre, the during, and the post. You know, if we do go down the digital route more permanently, then, well, can we do it a meet and greet before sort of making that final decision around who to hire? It does work both ways though, so it's important that the candidate is being equipped with what they need and feeling empowered to say so, in order to say, yeah, Capgemini is right for me, or, you know, Sir Jesse, whoever.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's there's so much there, isn't there, to unpack and think about in terms of Rowena's point. It does require a couple of brave souls to do something radically different in a very new way for the market to think, okay, we could shift in a very different direction, because you don't have the evidence base. And I think that's what we have with assessment centres, is a fantastic evidence base behind us to support what we're doing, and we know that it delivers for us and for our business and for the candidates.
I think as well, sorry, one final point is, you know, long gone are the days now where we're worried about our train being late, for example. It's, oh my goodness, is my Wi-Fi going to hold up? Or is my brother going to get off his smart TV, for example? So, you know, let's not lose that human touch. It's very much a remote process for candidates, isn't it? You know, they submit an application, they maybe do a digital interview. For us, it's that engagement piece from start to finish, but also that face-to-face interaction, whether it is virtual or at an assessment, or sorry, at an office. You know, that's where people and companies can really have a bit more of an impact, I think, to set themselves apart.
Yeah, I completely agree. And one of the things I'm going to be watching with great interest is who does start to return to face-to-face assessment centres first, and whether or not that then has such a significant positive impact in terms of better understanding, human connection, human experience, knowing what the work environment's like, meeting people in person, that human, tangible experience then derives significant benefits to whoever goes first against competitors. And it's this bit for me about whether or not everybody's happy to accept digital at the moment because we have to, and as we start to transition back to normal, if it will stay, or if it's going to change, or if it is going to provoke critical thought and new approaches. I think it's such a fascinating time for us all to be working in this space. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. I'm just going to quickly check in with Stephen to see if we've got any questions that have come through in our last 6 minutes that you would like to direct to any members of our panel.
Sure, that's great. Really, thanks for those insights. So we had quite a few comments in the questions box. So people talking about how Joanna says that candidate feedback has shown that candidates love the convenience of faces, but do miss out on being able to what they think is presenting their best self in front of you know, in a face-to-face exercise. Jane at Vodafone talks about as well as pre-briefing session, they host live chats with existing graduates as a way of engaging candidates and helping them sort of get that kind of, I guess, that lunchtime experience that I'm always remember from that we try to deliver at assessment centres. In terms of questions, there were 2 questions actually came through on social capital. And this question around actually what are the impacts of digital on social capital? Does it actually make it better for candidates? Is it less of an influencing factor, or actually is it the other way around? Are those with plenty of social capital, are they going to make a better use of digital technology? So I don't know if anybody's got a view on that. That's the main question that's actually come out of those amongst the comments.
So I've got a view, which I'm then going to defer to the remainder of the panel because they may also have, you know, more insight than myself. I'd look out for some very interesting research that Handshake are launching, that they're calling netpotism, not nepotism, N-E-T, potism, where they're talking about those people who have a much greater degree of digital fluency and literacy and comfort in that space, broader digital networks, and whether or not that is going to give them a significant advantage over other candidates in the current climate. So I think that's one to watch with great interest. The second point that I wanted to make was, I think there's a really interesting debate happening around the social capital piece. So we've talked about different things today about how perhaps it feels more accessible and I'm more comfortable in my own home than I would be going to Canary Wharf. I think we can make some of those assumptions, but we don't know yet. Actually, there are some people who are feeling very uncomfortable sat at home, as you say, without good Wi-Fi or with a concern for what's happening or other people coming in and out. We've talked a lot to our candidates about digital anxiety and calling out the weird of that experience, both on the day and in advance, to say we know how that can feel, and giving them signposting to mental health support and resources as well, which might underpin some of that candidate experience. So I think it's easy for us to make connections or assumptions to say, hey, this should be better for social mobility for these reasons. I think there are lots of reasons why it might not be, and it might be a barrier. So I'm interested to see some of the statistics and the data coming out around social mobility and D&I reporting from the ISE over the next year or two.
Yeah,
sorry, Hannah.
Yeah, just from our perspective, I think it's something we were very willing to make sure we were very aware of from the very offset of our virtual assessment centres and any parts of our process. So D&I is a big focus for us, and anybody that requires any reasonable adjustments is also something we wanted to make sure everybody was still able to access our assessment centres. So like they said at Capgemini, we do the test call the day before, so we try and make people feel comfortable on that call to try and take away that panic and that anxiety. And at the very beginning of the assessment centre, our facilitators always say, we're all at home. If people walk in, don't worry. If your Wi-Fi drops, don't worry. So it's putting steps in place to make them feel comfortable. If that happens, it's out of their control. As we always say, you probably told your parents to stay out of the room, housemates to stay out of the room. But if it happens, don't panic. And I think they see it from our perspective with our hiring managers, that they're also human too, and these things happen to them as well. So it's setting that expectation is a big thing, I think.
Great. Kerry, Ben, thoughts on the impact of digital on social mobility and social capital?
There's pros and cons to everything, isn't there? Whether it's disabilities or social mobility, etc. I think it's just trying to predict potential problems, whether it's for your company or candidates as individuals, and trying to put a plan in place rather than being caught off guard or on the back foot. You know, if someone hasn't got access to a laptop, okay, well, can we get them into the office? You know, can we get approval to do so? Are they happy to travel? Can we provide them with the kit? Can their school or college provide them with a laptop, etc.? So yeah, I think it's just forward thinking, trying to predict what could happen, but then just being transparent with the candidates. In an ideal world, we'd give, you know, at least a month's notice ahead of any assessment centre. Sometimes that doesn't happen, I must admit, panic stations, but there should be enough time for both you as recruiters, but also candidates to say, right, look, okay, I don't want to assume anything, help me help you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think some people fear asking questions, and that it shouldn't be feared.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And I think particularly the Wi-Fi thing is very interesting when you look at some of our most deprived areas in the UK economically. We are talking about our coasts and our islands. And actually there isn't very much you can do by sending dongles to increase the Wi-Fi in those regions. They don't have it. Or it's very poor and unreliable. And yet that's where we've got some of our most impoverished people.
If you are recruiting into particular locations across the UK, you know, we're doing recruitment in Barrow, you know, right up in Scotland or the north. So, you know, can we run localized face-to-face assessment centres? So that's where maybe we can switch things up. So that would be the justification, for example. Or if it was for a particular client of ours, you know, confidential client, okay, well, can we group people so that it's not run virtually? I don't know.
Fantastic. Thank you. I like that idea of the localization and thinking about those specific offices, because of course they're always the most difficult to recruit for as well, aren't they? Ben, any final thoughts from you? You might know something we don't on this social cultural capital piece.
No, I mean, I was just going, I know there's a second question, so just very quickly, I love the idea of nepotism. And just a reflection is that as assessors and being subject to our unconscious biases, the traditional lunchtime mingling, the tea break mingling, the welcome to the day at the start, in a way, the virtual assessment centre is a little more ring fenced. So you get your little Zoom call, you're assessed, and then you have your downtime. You have the next Zoom call, then you have some downtime. So I guess there's less opportunity for the assessor to be influenced by irrelevant factors, and likewise for the participants, maybe when speaking to other people, to start getting intrusive thoughts that could impair their performance of the day. So yeah, but it is all speculation at the moment, ripe for research.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I'm fascinated. For example, we've taken some very different approaches for candidates who wear full or partial face veils, who found digital assessment particularly challenging because they really feel like they can't express themselves in a digital format. And I think we may have candidates who are self-selecting themselves out of processes for that reason without necessarily wanting to vocalize it. And they wouldn't necessarily think to talk about that to us as an adjustment either. So I think there's all kinds of interesting things here in this digital mix for us to think about. We're 2 minutes over time. Do we have one more question or time for one more question, or do we need to draw a line on this fascinating debate here?
The rest were comments, really, Rebecca. So final comment came from Maria, thinking there's a really interesting question on this face validity piece. When you're talking about an in-person role, does that mean you actually need that kind of in-person validity? So yeah, comments more than questions. So I think we're there on the questions now.
I think Maria's spot on. If you're working in one of those sectors where everybody, they're not working digitally, they're delivering face-to-face every day and working face-to-face every day, it does, for me, question that candidate face validity about a digital assessment. So I think there are, as always, sectoral differences and nuances there as well. Great point from Maria, and one to watch. I don't think we've answered any questions, but hopefully we've given people lots and lots of food for thought. I'm sure you would all join me in saying a huge thank you to our wonderful contributors and panelists today, Kerry, Hannah, Ben and Rowena. I'm enormously grateful for your expertise and your contributions. It's been fascinating. Thank you.
And thank you for me. Thank you, Rebecca, for working so hard to pull together and for sponsoring this webinar. I think it's been really useful. It's interesting on the town halls, the employer town halls that we run, lots of conversations around this. I think people are still very much in the flux of dealing with the pandemic, or they're starting to put an eye on what the permanent changes are. It was interesting. I heard a couple of comments from employers saying that last year actually, recruiters got lots of praise from their business leaders for responding quickly. Now those business leaders are expecting 5-star quality. So it's interesting to see how this debate is changing. I'm sure we're going to come back to this conversation an awful lot over the coming months. So it's a great session. Thank you very much for all your contributions. Just a final reminder from me, for all of those of you who joined this webinar or registered, you will get a link to the recording, so you can go back and pick up anything that you may have missed, or please feel free to share that link. As I said at the start, the more that we can encourage conversation around all these issues, the better. So a final thanks very much from me. Thank you all.
Thanks,
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.